All right, so hello everyone. Thank you very much for paying attention to my research topic. I am truly humbled and honored to be part of this summit. My name is D.H. Lee. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Applied Human Sciences at the University of Minnesota Duluth. For the next 30 minutes, I am going to talk about how and why we can leverage mobile health to improve physical activity and health in adults with autism spectrum disorder. So I know it's been a long day for all of you, so I'd like to briefly refresh your brain. If you haven't decided where you should go for summer vacation, you can consider Duluth, Minnesota. We have the world famous lift bridge and a lot of parks and trails for outdoor activities. Duluth is a beautiful city on the shores of Lake Superior. But please don't come to Duluth in the winter. Winter storm is brutal here. All right, so in this session, I'm going to talk about physical and mental health in adults on the spectrum and why physical activity is important as we discuss numerous health benefits surrounding physical activity participation. And then we move on to the potential of mobile health as an effective tool to improve health. And then we'll talk about our limited knowledge on physical activity levels and mobile health with a couple of my previous sample studies. So what do we know about physical and mental health in autistic adults? There should be more population-based studies, but the existing evidence indicates that both autistic adults with and without intellectual disability show poor overall health and well-being. And previous presenters repeatedly addressed this evidence. Adults with ASD tend to experience various physical health issues, including obesity, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, to name a few. And the rates of these issues are even higher in autistic adults compared to those with and without developmental disabilities. Autistic adults are also more likely to experience mental disorder, such as depression, anxiety, and increasing evidence suggests that these mental health issues often lead to suicidal thoughts and attempts in this population. But unfortunately, there are only few effective treatment options for these debilitating symptoms. A lot of individuals with mental disorders tend to rely on medications and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. But the problem is medications carry a high dependency risk, while CBT is very costly and time intensive with mixed results of its effectiveness. So those treatment options may not be sustainable in some cases, and thus complementary treatment options are necessary to sort of supplement these conventional treatments. So now I'd like to draw your attention to physical activity. Physical activity is one of the most important preventive care that can literally prevent future illness. And the benefits of regular physical activity participation are extremely well documented in the literature. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and CDC updated the physical activity guidelines for Americans in 2018. And we currently have the second edition. And according to these guidelines, adults should participate in at least 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week, as well as 2 days of muscle strengthening activities to see those health benefits. It's not necessary to squeeze in all activities at once. The recommendation here is that you identify times throughout your day to accumulate kind of short bursts of movement. And then progressively you can add in more specific goals like physical activity duration and intensity. I think since autism is not considered a physical disability, we shall apply the same guidelines to those with ASD. So regular physical activity participation can help manage weight, reduce risks for developing type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and some cancers. Physical activity can also strengthen bones and muscles, no matter your age or abilities. It is really well understood that the health benefits of physical activity can be the greatest for those who are currently physically inactive or highly sedentary. And importantly, physical activity can also reduce mental health risks by producing more endorphins and serotonin that can improve our mood. This is the reason why physical activity or ideally structured exercise programs are considered a complementary treatment option for people with mental disorders. Now, one thing that I want to emphasize here is sedentary behavior. Historically, sedentary behavior was viewed as a lack of physical activity. However, research now suggests even if people kind of achieve these physical activity recommendations, they can still face health risks from sitting far too long. So the point is breaking up sedentary time is becoming more and more important. And according to the Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines, adults should participate in physical activity. At the same time, should limit their sedentary behavior to no more than 8 hours per day as an independent health risk factor. Now let's talk about why mobile health can be an effective tool to improve physical activity and mental health in autistic population. We all understand that traditional face-to-face interaction, especially with neurotypical population, can be a challenge for those on the spectrum. But human technology interaction in mobile health is a lot more consistent and predictable compared to traditional face-to-face interaction. So there is almost no social demands in mobile health. So people on the spectrum can feel more comfortable and feel more sense of autonomy. And of course, there's also high cost effectiveness compared to other conventional options. And people on the spectrum commonly have distinctive strengths in visual spatial functioning, as well as a preference for learning through visual information. My colleagues and I conducted a survey study and found that autistic adults use technological devices over 6 hours per day, primarily for surfing the internet, using social media and online web-based gaming. So given the social preference and strengths in visual spatial processing, more intentional and user-centered mobile health can be effective in changing health behaviors in this population. Previous studies also support that mobile health-based behavior change interventions can be an effective tool to monitor and improve physical activity in neurotypical obese and sedentary adults. Despite all the promising benefits of physical activity and usability of mobile health interventions, there is not much research done for autistic adults. So most research on physical activity and sedentary behavior in those with ASD is based on children. And the findings indicate that this group is either less physically active or engages in similar levels of physical activity as their typically developing peers. And what's important here is that we also found that the level of MVPA, moderate to vigorous physical activity, in children with ASD significantly decreases with age, while also they become more and more sedentary. There are only a few studies that report general physical activity and sedentary behavior in autistic adults. And they use a parental proxy report or relatively less reliable objective devices for measurement. And their target sample were those with limited cognitive functioning or intellectual disability. So physical activity and sedentary time data on intellectually able adults with ASD is lacking. And it is unknown if these individuals really meet the physical activity guidelines. There's also a lack of evidence-based mobile health interventions in commercial markets, despite increasing demand. This is partly because the life cycle of any new mobile health app is really unpredictable. And it's really hard for our researchers to fully leverage the existing commercial apps because a lot of challenges like operational and financial requirements, privacy issue, security issue, operating system updates, and we often face in-app purchases to fully access certain programs. So kind of different dynamics between academia and commercial markets make it really difficult to rigorously verify the effectiveness of the commercial mobile health apps. Now, let me introduce a couple of my studies. So first study aimed to investigate objectively measured physical activity and sedentary time in intellectually able adults with ASD. We used Actigraph GT3X Plus triaxial accelerometers, which is one of the gold standard tools that a lot of physical activity researchers really extensively use worldwide. So based on the generally acceptable data processing standards, these are made based on neurotypical adults. We asked our participants to wear this accelerometer on their right hip for 7 consecutive days, including at least 2 weekdays and 2 weekend days. And we used counts per minute data to classify physical activity intensity, such as light, moderate, vigorous physical activities, and sedentary time. And then we screened the collected data using valid day and week standard, as well as non-wear time standard. So this is a preliminary study. So the sample size was small. 24 intellectually able adults with ASD participated in the study. Most participants were in young adult group, and over 80% of the participants were categorized as overweight, obese, or extremely obese, according to the BMI calculation. And we found that there were no significant differences in physical activity and sedentary time by biological sex and days of the week. So there was no difference between weekday versus weekend day activity levels. But notably, nearly 80% of the participants met the physical activity guidelines by accumulating at least 150 minutes of moderate vigorous physical activity per week. However, they were also highly sedentary by sitting more than 9 hours per day on average. So I admit that our study may have a selection bias and may have reactivity to accelerometer measurement because it's a new novel device. But intellectually able adults with ASD may be physically active while also highly sedentary, which is the active couch potato phenomenon. We have to note that people can be classified as both physically active and sedentary at the same time. So our goal should be kind of geared toward increasing physical activity and reducing sedentary time at the same time. And one more thing that I'd like to emphasize here is the importance of childhood physical activity experience. It's really critical for people with autism to learn from a very young age about physically active lifestyles and healthy habits. And we should really strive to provide more individualized physical activity programs based on their special interests, physical, intellectual, and psychological abilities. It's really highly likely that physically active children will continue to be active in their adulthood. So, prevention is always better than intervention. In the meantime, we also have to focus on developing and providing more accessible and autism-friendly lifestyle interventions for people who are already in their adulthood. Speaking of intervention, so I'd like to introduce my other study that examined the effects of a gamified behavior change mobile health intervention on increasing physical activity and consequently reducing anxiety in autistic adults. So as part of my doctoral dissertation studies, I developed an app called Puzzle Walk in collaboration with some computer scientists and public health researchers at Indiana University. We followed the participatory and user-centered development process. So a couple of autistic adults were involved in the entire app development process as team members. And we also conducted a usability study to receive feedback from both adults with and without autism spectrum disorder. We then incorporated behavior change techniques as a theoretical background and used some gamification techniques. So the app automatically converts users' walking steps into gaining time. So the app users could be kind of motivated to take more steps to earn more gaining time. We also provided top 3 school leaders with a $10 gift card as a kind of tangible financial incentive according to behavior change techniques. We used Spot the Difference puzzle game because it was deemed most accessible and easy to understand for a range of users with various cognitive abilities. And for the study, we compared the app's effectiveness with Google Fit because Google Fit was one of the most popular, accessible, and free physical activity tracking apps. So we wanted to see how Puzzle Walk app can be comparable with Google Fit in terms of its impact on increasing physical activity and reducing sedentary time and anxiety symptoms in autistic adults. So this was a consecutive feasibility randomized controlled trial. So the sample size was the same, 24 intellectually able those with ASD, and data presented as mean and standard percentage change from baseline measurement. And Puzzle Walk group is displayed in blue, and Google Fit group is displayed in orange color. So during the 5-week intervention period, Puzzle Walk group participants reduced their sedentary time by nearly 30 minutes per day, while Google Fit group didn't show any substantial changes. MBPA was our kind of main point of interest as it significantly relates to health benefits, as I mentioned. Both groups showed significant improvement in MBPA at the first week of intervention, but the effect of app, especially Puzzle Walk, were not maintained because MBPA time regressed to the baseline level at the end of intervention. But these changes were not statistically significant. We were looking at the impact of app-leveraged physical activity and sedentary time changes on anxiety symptoms as an adjunct treatment. So we use back anxiety inventory, which is 21 item self-report measure of anxiety symptoms. Both groups showed reductions in anxiety scores after the physical activity app intervention, but these changes were not significantly, statistically significant either. The only variable that showed a statistical significance between the two groups is total app usage time. As you can see, Puzzle Walk group participants spent a lot longer time in app use throughout the intervention period compared to Google Fit group, which is the evidence of high user engagement among Puzzle Walk group participants. We also found a very interesting result. As I previously mentioned, we were looking at the consecutive impact of physical activity and sedentary time change on anxiety level. So we did correlation analysis. Unexpectedly, anxiety level was unfavorably associated with sedentary time after the intervention. In other words, participants felt more anxious when they were less sedentary. It was potentially because sedentary behavior was considered a favorable behavior for adults with ASD, or at least kind of part of their routine. So breaking up this behavior may have negatively affected the anxiety level. So our findings showed similar effectiveness between the two groups, although Puzzle Walk group's user engagement was significantly higher. To summarize, customizable app with intentional design elements like Puzzle Walk may be effective in decreasing sedentary time and increasing MVPA for short term. And previous studies consistently reported that mobile health interventions are generally effective for only short term. So more longitudinal cohort studies with more rigorous user engagement strategies are really necessary. And importantly, behavior change interventions for autistic adults shall be multifaceted. So they can focus on increasing physical activity, reducing sedentary time, and also managing mental health symptoms concurrently. And again, we should really understand that every individual is situated differently. So it's critical that we move toward individualized intervention approach that focuses on meeting individual needs and special interests. These are the future work that I'd like to suggest. First, we need to clarify not only the quantitative aspect of physical activity, but also the specific types and dimensions of physical activity and sedentary behavior in autistic adults. And second, we need to examine various correlates of physical activity and sedentary behavior, such as families' physical activity engagement, socioeconomic status, environmental barriers, personal barriers, and also other co-occurring diagnoses like gastrointestinal disorder, sleep disorder, and other mental health disorders. And lastly, we need to evaluate the long-term effectiveness of mobile health interventions on physical and mental health in various subgroups of autistic adults. I'd like to acknowledge that my studies have been funded by the American College of Sports Medicine Foundation and granting aid program from the University of Minnesota's Office of Vice President for Research. Thank you very much for your kind attention.